Hate bounces, how man-hating and man-bashing harms women, the making of a misogynist. Misogynists are not born, they are made. Once, a long time ago when the world was young, I loved women with all my heart and soul. I grew up among strong, competent women who understood that all living things need to be taken care of and will flourish if that happens. The men I grew up with knew that as well. Everyone knew that people must live and work together and find ways to cooperate and just deal with the inevitable differences that arise and keep them in perspective. They knew that people are not perfect, but that most of them try to be as good as they can manage. They took the measure of a person in wholeness, and if there was more good than bad to a person, they accepted that person's faults as being part of the package, which was still valuable, if a bit flawed. After all, nobody really is perfect. We all knew that. And then something happened, and that something was called feminism. I remember the early days of the movement when it was called women's liberation, which was a high-sounding and noble cause in a country which is founded on a document which cites liberty as one of the 3 inalienable rights that every person has. No one with a sense of fairness and an understanding of civics could be against women being liberated and treated fairly, and there was also the promise that some of the ways men were being treated unfairly would change along with it. And, as the old joke goes, if you believe that one, then I have some lakefront property in the Mojave Desert I'd like to talk to you about. I learned very quickly that feminism wasn't about liberating people from their previously too restricted roles which were assigned to them based upon the plumbing they displayed at birth, but rather was founded on a number of absolute falsehoods which had nothing to do with freedom, equality or fairness. The fundamental premise that men had more power, not just a different kind of power in a different area of society as a whole, but more power in a complete and absolute sense, was something that I vehemently disagreed with. I could come up with thousands of examples of circumstances in which women had more power than men did, and in every example they gave of where men did have any power, I could easily point out the uneven distribution of power among men, and how a few men at the top of the wealth influence pyramid had a lot of power, but that the vast majority of men had very little. The strangest thing was that most of the situations in which I was being told I had or was exercising power seemed absolutely ridiculous to me. When I was a college freshman, one day I was walking across campus towards the student union. I reached the door about a half a step ahead of a female student, so, as I had been brought up to do, I hastened my last couple of steps and held the door open for her. Instead of the smile and nod which I had been used to in response to such simple acts of social courtesy, she flew into a rage and started screaming at me about what a male chauvinist pig I was, and that she was perfectly capable of opening the door for herself and didn't need any goddamn man to do it for her, and kicked me in the knee. Shock is a totally inadequate word to describe my response. I was at a loss to understand any of her reaction. She couldn't have been any more totally, completely, and absolutely wrong about my motivations and purposes. I instantly assigned her to the categories of mentally defective, hate-filled, and female. Over the next several years, a lot of women joined her company. A couple of years later, a woman that I was dating described her feminist consciousness raising group as consisting of perfectly satisfying man-hating sessions. Again, I was bewildered. I asked why she found hating me so perfectly satisfying. I don't remember the answer she gave, but she soon proved to me just how true that statement was of her. Like the knee kicker in response to having a door opened, it seemed that anything and everything I did was proof that I deserved her hatred and rancor. At least 10 years later, she called me out of the blue to apologise. She said she realised that she had just gotten swept up in a group consciousness of hatred and had finally realised what had happened and that I had not deserved the bile she had spewed upon me. It was, I suppose, better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick, but it was too little and too late, because by then I had encountered so many other women who acted in pretty much the same way that it had simply become part of my view of what women were. Somewhere, deep down inside, either hidden or proudly displayed, women hated men. Women came in a variety of sizes and shapes. Most had breasts and female genitals, but they all seemed to come with a hatred and fundamental contempt for men. One woman I dated while Jimmy Carter was still president spoke of my hatred of men in the same matter-of-fact tone she might say, my nose. It was just an integral part of her. Needless to say, this presented me with a significant paradox and source of internal conflict. being a healthy heterosexual male, I had the natural and universal desire that men have to have a love relationship with a woman. But how is it possible to love someone that returns hate for that love? So over time I began to develop a wary, distrustful posture towards women. I still dated them, but I had become so conditioned to expect hatred from them that I simply accepted it as a part of the price I had to pay in order to be involved with one. My desire for a relationship was still strong, but was opposed by a distrust and unwillingness to let someone who hated me get the upper hand over me. Thus, in my mind, the concept of commitment became one and the same as trapped in a relationship with someone who hates me. I was indeed one of those men who couldn't make a commitment. The worst part of this for me is that it blinded me to the warning signals of some truly sick personalities. The hostility for which I had become accustomed to enduring from women became only a matter of degree, greater or lesser. And with a baseline of being kicked in the knee for the courtesy of opening a door and learning how satisfying man-hating is to some women, I had no yardstick to sort out the seriously sick and deranged women from any of the rest. As a result, I ended up in some relationships that were truly horrible and very damaging to me. And, of course, each of these left scars which, over time, built up so much emotional scar tissue that I began to lose all the positive feelings I once had for women. That is the personal side, and I won't bore you with the details of these stories. But there eventually got to be so many that I developed the attitude that the question was not whether a woman would burn me if I let her get close enough to do so, but when and how soon it would happen. On the political side, things were just as bad, if not worse. About the same time I started becoming the target of violent physical attacks by individual women for what I perceived as courtesy, I also became the target of vicious verbal attacks by women collectively, just for being a man. I remember the first time I saw the slogan, "A woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle." I knew my face had just been spit in. Men were not just useless to women, we were irrelevant. We had no purpose in a woman's life, and did not belong in her world at all. It was a message of hate, dismissal, and refutation. But I also saw it as a warning of what was to come. It was like seeing clouds on the horizon, and knowing that it is time to get under cover because a storm is brewing. Soon it became apparent that women could say any damn thing they wanted about men, no matter how wrong, no matter how hateful, no matter how unfair. And that was fine. But every time I stood up and said, "No, that is wrong, there is another point of view," I'd get some little fembot harpy in my face, shrieking the same old tired slogans like a mindless chatty Cathy doll, about how I was threatened by losing my power, wanted to keep women in their place, and was probably violent, and was a misogynist. The dull predictability and regularity of it all was only kept from being terminally boring by the shrillness and sheer vehemence of their attacks.